Welcome to the Home Studio Hangout podcast, where we explore what it's like building, running, and working out of a home studio with your hosts, Joshua Matotek, Andrew Simmons, and many guests in different areas of the music industry.
Welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I am your host, Drew, and today we have a special episode where we are going to be going through 6 of some of my favorite conversations that we've had this year. We have clips from our conversation with producer Aaron Pace, songwriter and artist Low Spirit, producer and mixer Shane Lance, songwriter, producer, and mixer Seth Goodwin, also known as Velvet Year, mixing and producer Phillip Odom, and artist and producer songwriter Matthew Parker. These are just clips from our conversations from each of their episodes. If you want to listen to these conversations in their entirety, you can check out links to the full episodes in the description or check our backlog based on the episode number found in the description. We've enjoyed having these conversations with such awesome guests, and we hope you've enjoyed listening to them. And if you're new here, I hope this episode can be kind of a catalog of some highlights to go back to in our back catalog and go check out some of those. So without further ado, the best of part 1 of the Home Studio Hangout in 2023.
Like partners are so good at this thing, it is mind-boggling, because I'll be mixing something or whatever, and I'm like knee deep in like the most terrible funk of imaginable, right? I'm so pissed off, and I'm not like eating and I'm not drinking, whatever. And she's like, "Hey, what's up? Why are you like upset?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm like mixing this record I don't want to do anymore. And like, it's not the kind of genre I don't, whatever it is." And she's like, "Have you thought about not doing it anymore?" And I was like,
Genius.
Oh my God, I didn't even think of that. What do you mean not do? What do you mean? Like, don't take on a project that is not a good fit for my mixing or whatever? And she's like, yeah. Like, man. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, wait, I could do that. Well, it's one of those things where it's like, where like this industry's so like work centric, where it's like,
we get so locked into it.
You're supposed to do everything,
Right. Just do anything that comes at you.
Yeah, it's like right now, like I'm just like focusing on like the projects that like I really, really want to do, that are fun to me. Like I always tell Lee, and he hates it. I'm like, dude, I hate writing pop punk. Like I hate it. He's like, well, you're really good at it. And I was like, but it's not fulfilling,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then like I played him some stuff that I was doing with this artist named Jay, who's like about to start dropping. And he's like, I thought you said you hated pop punk. And I was like, but like this is different. Because like we didn't set out to write pop punk. Right. All of our songs started as like an acoustic guitar, and like we're singing over it, and like they all feel like pop songs. And then whenever it came time to produce them and cut vocals, then like it slowly evolved to that point, and it felt natural. Right. It's not like I was forcing myself to be in this headspace,
Right.
And so that's something I'm trying to get a little bit more in tune with also, where it's like the songs that come out with my name on them aren't necessarily like something that I consciously did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think about that a lot more too, because that's kind of interesting.
Be intentional about what your thing is.
I do think that is growing up as a producer, right? Is having that aha moment of I can just like not do work that I don't want to. That's a pretty pivotal moment, I think, as a producer. We're shifting, and even like as a mix engineer, kind of across the industry, even as a songwriter really, too. It's it's just like I don't want to do this, so I'm gonna not.
Yeah,
and also then you also have good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, it also benefits the people that you turn down, right? Like, I know that seems so esoteric, but it's a thing where like, if you were not going to be a good fit as the producer, mixer, songwriter, what have you, because your heart's not in it, then whatever kind of bullshit you were going to come up with is probably not going to be as good as the person who is going to care about it a lot, right?
Yes,
and like
100%.
It's like once you click that, where you're like, oh, they don't need me because I don't want to be there, then that's a good moment for you too, because then it's a context where like you can be like, hey man, like I don't think I can put my whole ass into this, so find somebody that can. And make sure that they care about it as much as you do, because that's the bit, right? That's what we're here for.
Yeah, exactly. And if you know somebody that really enjoys that thing, like you can send them there. Yeah,
right. Absolutely.
Yeah, help out the homie.
It's definitely something that I think a lot of people run into, you know, and it's always just because it's like, oh, work, you know.
Right. Work is work.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. So I've just been like focusing on like getting back to like what I really, really love and pushing for that, you know, because it's like, if we're going to do this, like, okay, like our alternatives, right, are to go work a 9 to 5.
Right.
And it's like,
no,
I could work a relatively fulfilling 9 to 5. Like I'm great at sales.
Sure.
I would be so happy doing that.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I can make, you know, a great living off of that. And so it's like, but the whole time I'll be like, oh, but I could be doing music. So it's like, while I'm doing music, why would I put myself in the position where I'm doing work that isn't fulfilling?
100%.
You know, because it's like at that point you're better off just picking up whatever job you could pick, you know?
I mean, yeah. I mean, like, you know, I think that's the other thing that, like, you know, with the partner sort of like randomly snapping you out of it thing happened to me a few times, which was like, you know, I was, you know, really deep in, like I was saying, like part of that transition was like my transition into this sort of pop, you know, whatever, all kinds of non-metal genres, right? A big part of that transition was straight up like I was down all the time because I was taking on a bunch of work and I was like doing it good, like, you know what I mean? Like as good as you can, but it's the kind of thing where like, you know, it was taking a toll on me because it wasn't where my heart was at. And at some point, my beautiful, lovely wife goes, hey, why are you doing that? She's like, if you're going to be miserable, would you rather be miserable with like a steady paycheck then? And I was like, oh. And she's like, so if you're going to go for the sort of like, you know, ephemeral sort of like independent contractor vibe, why not just do stuff you like? And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a good point. Because it's like, would you rather be miserable working on stuff you hate and then also not knowing when the next paycheck is going to come? Or would you like to like, you know, figure that out?
I mean, to be honest, the song that I was talking about that I did with Pace last year, we wrote a first verse, a chorus, and a second verse. And we wrote like this idea for a bridge, but that's all we left it at. And so, I mean, the basic bones were there, but what the song ended up doing, like we tried to produce it out actually between then and now. So it's been about a year. We tried to produce it twice, and poor Aaron, he like came to produce it and I was just like, this just isn't right. Like both times I was like, this just isn't right. It's not what it's supposed to be. And like, I could tell that he was like frustrated with it. So like for me, I was like, I just put it down. I was like, whatever, it's fine. It'll happen when it happens, or it just won't. And that's okay. And, like I said, I reopened like just the piano and vocal of that song a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and was just like, man, like, I feel like it should just be this. And then all of a sudden, like I was sitting down with it. And I told Pace that exact thing. I was like, maybe we should just keep this a piano ballad. So he's like, okay. So he like basically like comes up with all the piano sounds and everything, and then makes a bounce and sends it to me. And when it gets to the bridge, like I instantly like heard it in my head exactly as it was supposed to be. And then I finished it, and I'm like so glad that I waited like a year to do it, because
sometimes you need fresh perspective.
It never, ever, ever would have turned out how it turned out now, which is most certainly the best song I've ever done. It would have never become that had I like tried to just make it happen quickly.
It's especially hard to get production right on like super good songs that get stuck in your head. Because if you mess it up on the first pass, like there's no shot that you're ever going to hear it in a different way.
But that unless you put it down and just don't and don't
and you just walk away from it for a bit.
Because that's exactly what happened to me, because we like produced it. It was like kind of like a Zayn meets like Nick Jonas like kind of like vibe when we produced it the first time, and I was just like, this just feels like I'm just like trying to be really swaggy on a song that's like about my mom. Like, it's weird. And so it just didn't feel right. And then like the second time we tried to come back to it, we like tried to make it a rock song, and I was like, no, this is just doesn't feel right. So it's just one of those things where it's like I don't know, like the write happened quickly, the bones happened quickly, and I think that that's because the song was real, and it was a lens into what I was like going through with my mother at the time. And so it just kind of poured out quick. We had a progression, we had a melody, we had the lyrics in an hour. But then it took an entire year to visualize and get the rest of the landscape out and like the rest of the arrangement down. The way it should have been the entire time. But neither one of us knew what that looked like or sounded like a year ago. So I don't know. I think my whole point is that like you never know, like there's so many things. I think we try to find like a formula, right? As producers and as songwriters, I think that like our brain naturally wants to find something that like is kind of quick, effective, and like really works and always turns out a great result. But again, this goes back to the very beginning of our conversation. There's no one way to do it. There's no one way to produce music. There's no one way to write a great song. I think that you're going to find a lot of little things that like work and like help you to integrate into your workflow to like find a great way to make something. But I think there's always going to be multiple avenues of getting from start to finish. Like, and so, absolutely. But I totally get why you would focus on, like, you're like, oh, I should focus on the songs that come quickly because those are usually the best ones. Because I've definitely gone through that exact thing where I've been like, this should take 30 minutes, no more, to like come up with this great fucking song. And I did that for a while. And I kind of shot myself in the foot because I would come up with like this like verse chorus idea, and then like just like move on. And then I had like maybe like 20 songs that like in the moment I was like, this is sick. But now I'll like go back and listen to it in the Dropbox and be like, this wasn't that good. Like, you know, but you're like chasing that feeling.
I think it is like a really important thing, like, well, a really important like phase for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like I think as far as like the hierarchy of like what's important while we're working, it's like having that super, you know, productive feeling, you know, where you're just like flying through it and you're like, yes, this feels good, you know, like, that's a really good thing to like really become familiar with. And then you could take a step back and be like, well, now that I'm good at that, now I could take a little bit longer and make sure that this is like super, super sick.
I think it also stems from like this revelation that you have where you're like, oh, the best songs like happen in like an hour or less. And you're like, so that's like the trick. That's what I've been missing the whole time. Cause like, I think all of us start out as like the best songs have like 100,000 tracks and are like hours of work. And it's like this really complicated thing. And we like build it up to be this crazy thing in our head. And we overwork ourselves because we feel like that's what's going to lead to a great song. And then when that doesn't churn up a bunch of great results for multiple years, you're like, oh, well, the problem is that like the best songs come quickly. That's crazy. So I should like just start chasing that. So like, it totally makes sense. Like it's a total valid, like, I think it's a rite of passage for anyone that's like an actual like songwriter or producer to like have that eureka moment. And then I think get to the end of it and be like, oh, well, maybe I'm like missing something here. And I think, again, it goes back to the book thing. You have to write 9 turds to like have a golden egg, right? Like it's just what it is. It's creativity. I don't think you can
and the more you write the crappy ones, the easier it is to write the better ones.
Right.
You start innately learning
how to avoid
what works, what doesn't, how to avoid those pitfalls.
Yeah, 100%. Writing is just weird, man. Creativity is weird, and it's going to ebb and flow. It's going to change with your environment. with how stressed out you are, with what you're eating, with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and like and your lens on life. I think that's probably the biggest one for me. As I like, I write about my life. That's what I do. And a lot of writers, have their own thing. Some people write about fantasy, just like in books, or some people only write love songs. And sure, I'm sure that they stem that from their own personal experience, but I'm sure they're not like falling in love with a different person every day of the week. But for me, it's like it's totally dependent on what's going on in my life, who is in my life, what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, how I mitigate stress, and like all of these things like have to create like the perfect storm, if you will, for me to like have a moment that just like feels really good for me to sit down and be productive and make something.
Let's do two sides of this, and maybe you can answer it in one answer. But best practices for preparation on like a new artist coming into the studio with you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have an artist flying in next week, so I'll speak to our conversations as I prep him. If there's a song that exists already, I don't know if it's easier, but that the path is more obvious. Yes. You need to have that song as prepared as you want it to be. Maybe have some references for the vibe you're going for. Chat about it with the producer. That's what I like to do. I like to really have an understanding of what does the artist have, and where. Maybe this is the best way to put it. What do they have now, and where are they looking to take it? So we can like figure out the path between the two. I can spend some time thinking about it. They come in with this kind of premeditated vibe. That is, again, I wouldn't say it's ideal because I made a lot of great songs with artists from nothing. But that is the obvious path when a song exists or a basic idea exists already. If something doesn't exist, which is a good example for the most part of what I'm working on next week, I just talk with an artist about, I try to narrow something down and just say, okay, I'm hyped on just coming up with something from scratch. What are you listening to? Send me a playlist of songs that you're vibing on.
I love doing that.
Yes, same. Honestly, sometimes it's more fun because there's an open-endedness to it that is that's freeing.
It's also really cool because you will always think that, like, especially if it's someone you've worked with before, like you always think you know where they're at, and then they'll send you a playlist, and there's always one song on there that you're like, oh, okay, now this could be really cool because it's way different than what the box that we've created.
Yep. Yeah, it's absolutely true. So that's what we're doing right now. And as you guys both know, it can go a million different places, but it's a good place to start. Just getting an understanding of what they're vibing on. Maybe trying to narrow down, like this artist, I would think we're working on 2 songs and try to get some feel. Like, not that I'm trying to get them overcommitted, but you hoping for a hype song and a chill song? Like, what are we hoping to walk out with here? And then that's it. And then I think you said there was a part 2 to the question.
What are the best ways that you've seen as a producer? What are better ways that an artist can come in more prepared for you? So, like, speaking to like, I think you understand what I mean on that. Yeah.
I think similarly, but just having a clear vision. This is what I say often. If there's a vision, if there's a vibe, if you're the artist and there's something you're going for, dig for it. Try to make sense of it so you can give me or the producer some clarity on that so we can find that together. Conversely, though, maybe there's not a vibe and we're just going to go for whatever. Knowing that helps too, if that makes sense. But choosing one of those paths is really helpful because meaning, what if they didn't tell me they have something specific in mind, so they come in and we're just like, we're in this kind of this doesn't happen. So I don't mean this to sound like frustrated, but imagine we're in like this passive aggressive situation where you're just hoping I discover the vibe that you have in your head, but you've not told me. And we're just kind of going, you know what I mean? That would not be, just tell me. If you want a hype song, you got this, you love this like Dominic Fike song, then tell me we love that song and we're not going to rip it off, but let's listen to it. Absolutely. Let's go for it. Conversely, if like, actually I want to intentionally not have anything in mind, even knowing that as a producer, for me is helpful. And I try to get to the bottom of one of those 2 paths. Is there something that exists here that we're trying to pursue, or is this wide open? Either is great, but it helps to know.
Sure. And I think choosing one or the other, to speak to that, is a lot more freeing mentally for the producer, right? Because if you know that you're going for a specific vibe, then your brain can lock in within that box and be creative within that box. If you know you're not going for any specific vibe, it's more freeing in a different way, because then you can just like react on gut instinct with everything rather than trying to work within a pre-existing framework of, you know, we want a Dominic Fike song, or we want, you know, an Uzi Vert song or whatever.
So true.
Like, I would love to learn like how your process works on all that later maybe, but I would love to learn how you kind of went into the content space and like your thought process, and like you're trying to separate yourself and, you know, getting into making YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it definitely started with TikTok. Like most people, I started probably about the same time that like COVID was happening, or even, no, I think it was like maybe a little bit before that. And I just started posting like mix tutorials and stuff like that. And I noticed like, oh, some people actually like these. And so I kept making them. And, you know, through that, I would just kind of, I didn't really have anything beyond just, I wanted to make a TikTok. Like I've enjoyed guys like Andrew Huang for forever. And so I just wanted to make like content like that.
The GOAT.
Yeah. And so, but then after a while, I realized like, oh, some people are asking in comments like, hey, can I hire you for stuff like that? And so that sort of developed like the idea of like content models as like, actually like a lead generation, if we're getting business term wise. But what I noticed was that, and I went really hard on TikTok, really hard on for a long time. I think I was doing one a day for almost a year. And they were like, you know, not to stroke my ego, but they were high effort TikToks. Where
they were really good. They were really good. I did one a day for 6 months, and mine were like middle to high effort. Sometimes some were more effort than others, obviously, for me. But I even noticed, even in a 6 month time period, like, bro, if you're just consistent with that stuff, you grow fast. Yeah. As long as what you're making is at least great or good.
Yeah. And so I did that for a long time, and it eventually got to the point where a lot of cool stuff happened because of it. So like I talked about recently, but like I did a random video of like the Slate ML2, like their small pencil condenser microphone. And they saw that because it did really well. That one just blew up randomly. And so they like messaged me and they're like, hey, would you want to do like some ad stuff with us? And so they've sent me their ML1, and we did a thing this last month recently for their for the Mic Month sale for that thing, which was like cool stuff that I never thought would ever happen. Yeah. And but what I did notice was that I'm trying to find the best way to describe it. There's a certain kind of person who will follow you on TikTok, and it's like you cannot escape that because of how TikTok works. So, like the way that I describe it is like a YouTube viewer or YouTube subscriber. That is somebody who is subscribed. They are seeing your content that you are posting on YouTube, and they are like, I want to see more of this. And when they do that, they are almost like subscribing to like a Netflix show. It's like a form of entertainment for them because people use YouTube as entertainment. Long form stuff is there. So people will like sometimes not have a Netflix or a Hulu, and they'll just watch YouTube at the end of the day as like entertainment for fun. And the kind of person who subscribes to you on YouTube is really valuable because that's somebody who like wants to connect with you on that level. Whereas on TikTok, almost everybody is on the For You page. Like to the point where like if you're realize you're on the following page, you're like, oh wait, I shouldn't be on this. And then you scroll back over to the For You page. And the For You page is 100% algorithmically generated. So when somebody likes your stuff or follows you on TikTok, you're still like, that doesn't mean that they're going to see you necessarily. That just basically tells the algorithm, I want to see this person more often in my generated algorithm.
Yeah,
that's happened to me. There is this one dude, I forget his name.
That's the other thing right there that you just said, Josh.
Yeah,
you don't know who
I don't
people
even remember
are.
his name. I followed him. I loved his cooking videos, and he disappeared from my feed. And then one day, after like months, he popped up on my my For You page, and I was like, "Oh, thank God, he's back."
Yeah, because
then I realized he didn't go anywhere. I just haven't been seeing his videos.
It's literally because it's the algorithm based off of like regurgitating what you like and what you interact with. And I noticed that from a content maker standpoint, where I could, now I have 25,000 followers on TikTok. I can still post a video, and if I don't do it right, like if I don't post it at the right time, if I don't grab people in the first second in the right way, if I don't have it be an interesting topic, I can still get like 20 views. And it's literally like you're the person who's committing to following you on TikTok. It's like worth less than an Instagram follow. Because at least then on Instagram, your feed is primarily like, well, now it's ads, but it's primarily people that you have said I want to follow, and I will see more of this.
And it's
like
generally
if you make a new Instagram account and you're not following anybody, your feed is empty.
Yeah. I found him. His name is Sad Poppy, and he doesn't post that often. He posts like sometimes only twice a month, sometimes like 5 times a month, but it's like I think just because of that, like I don't get a lot of his content, even though almost all of my content on TikTok is cooking.
and
it's like
think about that. His videos are really good. You like them. He's not able to put out more than like one couple every month, and because of that, he's not getting recommended.
Yeah,
that is ridiculous. How TikTok works. It is 100%. Based off of like consistency and stuff like that. And so eventually I just got to a point where I'm like, I will take the L in terms of growing algorithmically and just put stuff out consistently. So I think I'm doing like 3 a week now, which has been really easy because what I'll do is I'll make a YouTube video and then immediately after that, I'll record those 3 TikToks really quickly and just edit them alongside my YouTube video and just schedule them all to auto post throughout the week. And I've done that for the past year, I want to say. And that's worked out really well for me because it almost is a way to like redirect to the YouTube stuff where I feel like YouTube is almost like more of like an email list.
I've noticed more people using that model. I quickly went to that model. Whenever I started posting YouTube videos, I quickly went to I'm just going to chop up my YouTube video and find the cool parts that I want to showcase and make those the showcaseable pieces or whatever. And then sometimes I'll do, phone camera stuff every now and again that's a little more topical or whatever. Or if I find somebody like in a comment, like I'll reply to it via a video. So it creates a TikTok. So, pushes the algorithm a little more. So the transition was you were doing the TikTok thing. It was doing really well. You transitioned over to the YouTube side of stuff. Was that a harder transition going from short form to long form content about audio?
I would say the big transition was just in terms of time commitment. So like with TikToks, I could make a bunch of TikToks really quickly. Like in an hour, if I set an hour aside, I could theoretically make like 6 TikToks or something like that. Whereas with YouTube, it's a big time commitment. So on every video I'm doing right now, I think it's about 4 to 5 hours per video. So right there, that's just a barrier of entry that not a lot of people are willing to jump over, because my content on YouTube is like hyper focused on a specific genre, a specific style, and really, really trying to make that like entertaining for people who are not into producing or anything like that.
For sure.
And because I've focused on that, I actually noticed it was a lot easier to get people to jump on board with it. It was still really slow. That's another thing when you go from TikTok to YouTube is TikTok is very much based off of like the over instant gratification of like, you get a follower, you get a like, you get and it's like made to artificially, that's part of the algorithm, is like made to artificially give you those senses of dopamine, even though you've got 10,000 followers, it probably doesn't mean anything. Whereas, you know, with YouTube, it's a lot slower, but when somebody does follow, when somebody does like, it means a lot more. So like, I have 25,000 TikTok followers, and I think I'm just now getting to like 5,000 YouTube subscribers.
Yeah.
I get 99% of my jobs from YouTube. I get almost barely from Instagram or TikTok.
That's but it's kind of, I mean, it's a business model, right? It's the top, it's top of funnel for the short form content, funnel them down to the long form content, and then eventually we'll say like, I don't know if you have your KPIs on that, but 1 to 5% probably end up funneling down to at least an inquiry about a job.
Yeah, that's normally how it works out.
That's how it works out for me too. So I'm glad to know that is the same for you.
How do you, okay, so I've tried the whole YouTube thing. The thing that I run into is all the things I want to talk about are things I can't talk about. You know what I mean? Because
what do you mean?
Like for an artist and like it's not out. And so I can't just be like posting songs that aren't released yet, you know? Especially because a lot of my favorite stuff is vocal based. So like, do you ever feel like whenever you're like making these tracks specifically for YouTube that like you're like, it's not your best work?
No, I feel like I've leaned into my strength with it.
Okay. I just need to figure that out because like every time I would sit down to like make a YouTube video, I'd be like, today we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then I would start working. And then halfway through, like, I'm just like, yeah, this is dog shit. And then I just stopped doing everything because it's been like an hour and a half of me making
that still happens.
Awful stuff.
Yeah. I think the way I was able to avoid that is because my YouTube content is it's like, it's not me making something from scratch, like where people are walking with me while I'm making it. I make it on my own time. I do all the stuff that I want to do, and then I do a walkthrough of that. And
then you do a walkthrough.
Yeah. So and that has played a lot better because I'm doing like specific breakdowns of specific songs. So like this one specific 1975 song, I have listened to it. I've recreated all of those layers that I hear. Let me walk you through how I was able to recreate that. And a lot of people like that because it's like, you know, when people are trying to look up stuff, like I'm doing one right now where it's like Harry Styles As It Was. And like that little synth at the beginning, like people will look up like how to get that synth sound. And so now my video is kind of like a glossary for how to get that sound.
You're aiming for highly searchable, informative content.
Exactly.
Like SEO based content. I'm also I did kind of the same thing with my first couple videos, which have helped. My biggest video was a video that I did on how to use Ableton for live backing tracks because there's really not a lot of, I found out there's not a lot of videos on that. And I also kept answering the same questions for a bunch of different bands I was working with or artists I was working with. Like, I want to use backing tracks. How do I do that? Blah, 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 blah. Coming from a church background, that's like easy. Everyone knows how to do that in like larger church world. So for me, it was like, okay, here's how I just literally opened up a live set I built for a band and was like, here's how I did it. Here's how I did that. And then here's what I would recommend. And then I did a follow-up video of like a shorter video of like best practices. Here's some tips that you can do to like refine some stuff, or, you know, like my big one was like having an oh crap button to like solo out the click and the cue and kill all your tracks just in case you get like majorly off or something like that. Or, you know,
I think the best use of people's time with YouTube, if you're like thinking about getting into it, is do that. It's just like take the questions that you are constantly getting all the time and just make it a video so that if somebody asks you, even just in casual DMs, you can be like, here's a video I made on that. And they feel a lot more taken care of than just like a copy and pasted answer or a very half thought out answer that you have to type out multiple times.
Yeah.
But I think also another important side of it that I think was very crucial for me and my growth is all of my content is me doing what I do. Like people can point at my video and say, I want him to do that for me. And I think that is where I think a lot of people in the audio world might, it gets difficult because you need to balance it out a bit. But like, I know a couple of people right now where they're doing really well on TikTok, or they're doing really well on YouTube, and they are music producers and they are playing the algorithm game. The problem is they're not getting any people filling out their form because none of their content is them like showing people what they do. They're doing all of the stuff that triggers the algorithm. They're doing stuff that's searchable, but they're not, like, off the top of my head, I can't think of like, well, if somebody asked me, well, what does their production sound like? I'd be like, I don't know. I haven't heard any of their productions. Whereas like my content is nowhere near as like well performing as theirs. They're going to get way more subscribers than me by far.
Sure.
But every single video I'm doing is me showing people, hey, this is what I do. I'm essentially like those YouTube channels with like a power washer where they just set up a GoPro at the corner and they just show them power washing a driveway, and somebody can just point at that and be like, I want them to do that for me. And then there's a form in the bio.
There's a literal button. Yep. Moved to LA. Did anything really change for you as far as what you do and the clients you took on really when you did that? Yeah, it did. So talk about some of that. Yeah.
It's because I moved to LA and then a couple months later, COVID hit.
Oh, so you moved in 2020.
I moved at the end of 2019.
Dang.
And I it took me like a month to get my space all set up. And then I was just like finishing up records. I went back to Texas, did a record. And, I think I moved Halloween night. I got to LA like Halloween night. So I had November, December, and like the beginning of 2020. And then just like my life completely changed, like as everybody.
Yeah. That's wild.
It sucked. Like I was like, I live in LA. I had cool things lined up and
it was the most shut down city of anybody.
Yeah. 100%. I remember it shut down. And I had the Portrayal of Guilt record that Fantano reviewed. COVID hit and things were shutting down the week before we were going to record that. And it was before we were told to wear masks or anything. Like we didn't know. It was like the first week of COVID, like, hey, this is coming to the US. And I was like, talked to the studio. I was like, can we do this record still? It was in Austin. I was going to Austin. He's like, I'm not going to be there. Y'all can have the studio. And we just like quarantined ourselves. Like, but I was leaving LA and I was like, am I going to get stopped at the California border and like to be like no crossing state line? Like we didn't know what the vibe was. Like, it was the first week of like COVID. And, luckily the drummer of that band, worked at Taco Deli, and he was an essential worker and he just brought us tacos every day. So I didn't see anybody. I, was at the studio until like 4 a.m. every night. And then I had an Airbnb and I just went to the Airbnb for a couple hours and slept and came back to the studio, and we all were just like there, and we didn't, but that was like the last like record I did for a while too, because then it got serious like right after that. And all the studios closed after that. So it was this weird window of like everything open. This is like this is getting weird, and then everything being closed. And I fit the record in that 1 week before everything closed.
Yeah, because it was probably that time period in like early March where you were like, I think this is a thing. I'm not sure what's going on, and like we're hearing all of this stuff, and like, that's wild. So what's funny is, you know that Shane Lance did the exact same thing that you did. I don't know if you know that.
That's when he moved to LA. I know he moved to LA
in 2020, like late 2019.
No way.
Yeah. So we had him on the podcast, and he literally was like, "Yeah, late 2019. I was working in a studio in Seattle, and we were like, yeah, I think it's time to move to LA. Move to LA like late 2019. COVID hit."
And like, so COVID hit, and I did the Patrol record.
Yeah,
and that was cool.
And then
I
had
some and so I had stuff like that was like kind of lined up, and I was just like working on some records that just ended up never happening, or they ended up doing it themselves. And it changed my life because I got really good at mixing because everybody was recording themselves.
Because
because all the studios were closed. And everybody was like, well, you can't travel. We can't rent a studio. I guess I'm going to learn to record myself. And then I'm going to send it to Phil. And so I spent every day just like watching mix videos and subscribing to everything that I could subscribe to because I had nothing else to do, and I kept getting mix work. And so I was like, I'm gonna build my mix template, I'm gonna get my mix workflow like smooth as hell, to where I can get tracks, mix it,
churn them out.
And I just like developed my own like mix style and my own mix template, my own workflow. And I spent like all morning mixing, and then, took a break, and then just like consumed mixing content for like 5 hours straight after that, every day. I wasn't doing anything else. So I just absorbed every possible thing I could and got really, really fucking good at mixing. And now I'm like, I because before COVID, I was like, yeah, I'm a good mixer. Like, whatever. Like, I can record a band and mix their record, and it's gonna sound great.
When you have control over the tracks, mixing is a very different story than when you don't have control over the tracks.
Yeah. I could always mix my material because I was always really good at tracking. But now I can mix like any material, and I can get it close to the level that I could get it to if I was the tracking engineer. I always tell people who want to work with me, they're like, I love this record, I just want you to mix ours. I'm like, if you love that, you got to hire me for the whole thing. Because like I was top to bottom from the very beginning of demos all the way to the final master. So like if you want that level, hire me for that. You're going to get close, but it's not going to be like a full Phillip Odom record. But anyways, so it changed my life because after like COVID settled down and I started tracking again and working on records again, my mix was like through the roof, and I was just getting so many mixes as a mix engineer. So now I would never call myself like, I was always a producer who mixed his own records.
Yeah.
But now I like call myself a full on mixer because I crush it. I'm like good at it now.
Yeah.
And it was COVID that changed that, because that's all I did for months. Just grinding, just mixing everything, remixing old stuff to try and make it better, finding my flaws that I did in old mixes. Just like I had nothing else. I should have gotten better at guitar. I didn't practice guitar at all during COVID or like write songs, but I think I was just too depressed to like write anything. So I just consumed myself with just getting really good technically at a skill, and that was mixing. But it worked out because I make way more money mixing than I ever did playing guitar.
True. I should have probably done something like that a little bit more helpful for my job. I got really into Dungeons and Dragons over COVID.
That's sick. That's cool though. I've always wanted to like join a campaign and like learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons.
It's so fun, dude. I found out that like it's very, for people like us who like our job is kind of fully part of our life, like very tied into our life. It's very hard to make time because it's a lot of time. Even just like the game is like 3 to 4 hours a session, right? And then but outside of the game, it's like learning all of that stuff. And it's like the time it takes you to like, if you ever played like Skyrim or something like that, learning, or even like Elden Ring, multiple different build types for different characters and things like that. It's just, it becomes an all consuming thing. I probably should have done something a little better with my time.
That's one reason I haven't gotten into that stuff, because I'm really into like fantasy stuff. I read like novels and stuff like that. But I tend to like get really into something and like really get into it.
Yeah.
So if I got into that, I would just hyper focus and like just absorb everything. And so that for me now is like movies. That's my
nice
escape from music. So I go see pretty much like any movie in theaters, and I just really enjoy movies as like, oh, this is media I can consume that I'm not a part of, and like I can just really enjoy it.
I was talking to we had a friend of mine named Joe on. He works for Get Good Drums, the drum plugin company.
Oh yeah.
He was on a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about how like we think it's really important for people who are in music to have a non-music thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially like when you're in full, I think it's like, it's fine to be all consumed with music when you're like, you have another job and you have like music and it's like maybe 2 part-time things or whatever. And you're kind of in the transitionary point. But when it's all that you do 24 hours a day, you gotta have something to like break your brain from that. Otherwise, I don't
not only
think
for you, but for other people, because then you become insufferable. If your only thing is like only music and that's all you talk about and you can't have a conversation, that also like helps in the studio. Like Will is like a big sports head. He has like the largest collection of game used Phillies gear in his basement. He's the biggest sports fan.
I didn't realize he was a sports nerd like that.
Oh yeah, like anything Phillies, like basketball, football, like hockey, like anything. Mostly Phillies stuff. That's like. But anyways, he can talk with people about sports and he can talk about movies and stuff. But like the hang in the studio, just talking about stuff, and for me, it's like books or movies or stuff like that. That's important. And if you don't have any outside interest, it's awkward and people don't know what to talk to you about. Like you can't talk about other music after you just made music all day. It's like talk about something else, literally anything else.
Yeah.
So I think it's important, even just for the hang in the studio, working with artists, just to have literally anything else to talk about.
I actually think it's probably a good idea especially if you're trying to be a producer, mix engineer, whatever, or honestly, even tracking engineer, kind of whatever. You still need to be like a chill hang in the studio. But I think it's kind of important for you as a producer to kind of have a wide knowledge of a lot of different stuff. Just so that whenever you are producing a record from somebody and they have an interest, you can at least like be involved in their interest a little bit, right?
Yeah, totally. I think with every record I do, we kind of like get into something. Like, there's like a thing, I don't know, that's just like a bit or like just something that becomes like a thing for that record. And, sometimes it's like a special interest or that, we just like reference or something throughout. And, I made one record where we just quoted School of Rock like throughout the month. Just like, like eventually we quoted the whole movie, but just like, but we just talked about, movies a lot. And that was like, but yeah, I forgot where I was going, but
no, it's just, I think it's a good thing for you to have a wide breadth of knowledge in order for you to like, so a good, for instance, is like, I'm not super I'm kind of into sports, but like, I'm kind of in the sports of way enough to know that like, I was in the studio and their guitar player was like big NFL guy. And I was like, all right, cool. I know enough to like have a conversation. I know enough about NBA to have a conversation or college sports or whatever. But I'm not really like a sports dude outside of soccer. So, but then like, if you talk nerd stuff, like I am into that, right? Novels, video games, like, or honestly, like business stuff. I enjoy talking like, the business of the music industry or the business of like YouTube stuff or whatever. Just like, I enjoy things.
Totally.
I think having that knowledge, like I said, is a good indicator of you attempting to be a good producer also.
Yeah. But also just like showing interest in your artist's stuff. Like, I was working on a ceremony record with Will, and like this big wrestling event was going to happen, and Anthony from Ceremony, the guitar player, is like a huge wrestling head, and you know, there was like some match that was going down, and we like all watched it together, and I knew nothing about wrestling, but they were like explaining it to me, and I was like interested because like they're interested, and I was sharing this like big event with them while they were all watching it, and like I know nothing about wrestling and I didn't keep up with it, but in that moment it was like really cool to me, and we shared some stuff and like got to experience a moment, and I think that's really important because like the next thing, you know, there was like Law Dispute, we were doing a record, and the bass player was watching Buffy for the first time, and he all the way through, and I'm like, I know about Buffy, so we got to talk about Buffy as he like watched the series for the first time. And so like you just like find things to connect with artists, whether you know about it or not. Like I knew a lot about Buffy or anime and like stuff like that, but then I knew nothing about sports or wrestling. But I'm like down to learn from the to bond with people. You know, you can't be like not get into stuff that your artist is into. I feel like you have to kind of like bond over things, and I bonded over wrestling with Ceremony, and I still work with Anthony today because we were like, I was like a cool hang, and now I moved to LA, and when I moved there, he hit me up. He's like, hey, will you track this thing for me? I'm like, yeah. So I work with Ceremony sometimes, and maybe it's because I was like at that hang, you know, like talking about wrestling with him, and you know, who knows
for sure.
But
what are some fun things that you've been doing, like either with synths or with new plugins, or what's something that you've found like that's kind of been fun for you recently?
I guess I'll go and say what we talked about real quick before we started the podcast is just recently I was just throwing a guitar amp simulator on like some synths. Nothing like the synths themselves. I don't even really know what they sounded like without the amp, because I think I started with the amp on. They're nothing crazy, but like once you throw in the amp with a good amount of distortion, like you can get some pretty cool sounds, and they do sound a lot like guitars. So just be careful of that. If that's what you want, good. If it's not,
don't do that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Also, the level of like differences you can have in guitar amp simulators is like very different.
Yeah.
Like the type of cab you have, or the whatever.
You're speaking our language.
What I was actually talking about is I was just using FabFilter Saturn.
One of Josh's
This is like
favorites.
one of my new favorite plugins. It's not like I don't use it for amps usually, but they also just have an amp section in there. I usually use it for like saturation, because you can do multi-band or just single band or whatever. It's like super good. There's like tape saturation, tube saturation, some really good transparent stuff that you can use just for kind of like energy, but without like distortion. Or you can have like grit and breaking up. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. No, we use I use one that's very similar to Saturn called Thermal.
Is that for saturation or for like actual amps?
It's for saturation. It's just a distortion plugin.
Yeah.
It's like multiband. Very, very kind of similar, but it's more of an effects unit than it really is just for saturation. Josh, you use Saturn a lot, didn't you? You used to.
No, not really.
Or was it Lee? Was it Lee?
Lee uses Saturn a lot. Well, I now do what Lee does with. I use Saturn when I'm mixing real drums.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll bust it out. Like if I can't get like the right sound and I know it's in there, then I'll go for that. But like typically, as far as like saturation goes, like I don't use a lot of saturation while I'm mixing anymore. So it's like I'll use Spectre just because it sounds better than a typical EQ. If I want to,
do you know what we're talking about? Like, Spectre. Do you know that one?
I use True Iron a lot.
I don't know Spectre.
Waves Factory. It's made by a company called Waves Factory.
It's really sick.
It is probably the best plugin that you can buy. Like I would just go buy that and then go.
Is it just an EQ or what?
No, so what it is it's actually parallel additive saturation. So
oh, nice.
Yeah, so the best thing that you could do, like, just
I have something like this.
Just get the demo of it and then take a vocal that's been tracked on like a super dark mic, like an SM7, and then boost the high end of that vocal with an EQ, and then boost the high end of the vocal with Spectre, and you're going to be like, oh, this is so much better. And then you have all the different distortion profiles just like on Saturn. It's like if Saturn had like more of an EQ function to it than the tone.
It's very cool. You can do a lot of similar stuff that with Saturn that you do with Spectre. I like the form factor of Spectre because it's just like visually easier for my brain to understand.
Right.
Yeah. It's also really cool. Like what I do a lot, if I get a vocal that's been tracked on like very obviously like a Chinese capsule, then I'll cut a lot of the high end and then I add it back in with Spectre, and it like smooths it out real nice.
Yeah, it adds a smoother high end because it's all just saturated high end.
Right.
So then you turn it to like the warm setting or the tube setting or whatever, and it like just kind of gives it that like a little more natural high end than you would on like a cheaper Chinese capsule. That one's really cool.
It looks pretty cool.
I like that one a lot. We use there was a drum technique that Aaron Pace shared on here that we use for a lot of people use for snares. I think Lee started using it in mixing, where you like boost the fundamental in Spectre using saturation, and then you boost half that frequency and double that frequency slightly, not the same amount but slightly, and it creates, because it's saturation, it creates saturated resonance frequencies for that fundamental, so it sits a little better in mixes and like makes it more, gives it kind of like a presence. It's almost like a big presence knob for your snare.
It feels like you're retuning the drums. It's very
it does. It's crazy.
It's like very, very sick. I love doing that.
I used it on a couple mixes recently, and it's like it's made me be able to turn my snare more down in the mix to sit in a better spot and not compete with anything, but still feel very present.
It still has a lot of weight. Yeah. I love doing it, and because it's one of those things where if you do that, then you're like, that's like what my ears are expecting whenever I use like analog gear, because like the idea is that you're trying to replicate those.
It's very similar to just using a piece of analog gear, but you're able to control. And cool. What he was saying is that you could actually retune the fundamental of the drum by just shifting where you want that fundamental to actually be.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So if you need it to shift down like a little bit because the key of your song, for whatever reason, like doesn't match the fundamental of the snare sample that you like, and you don't want to retune it necessarily, this, like the weight of it's right, but it's not, the tone of it's not right. You can kind of shift that down a little bit. It's pretty cool.
Like in the plugin?
Just use Spectre for that, yeah.
Without like changing
the actual pitch, yeah.
Just like by where you boost
the fundamental of the snare.
Okay,
yeah,
I see.
So like that tonal fundamental, you know, every snare has like that doom or whatever. Yeah, you can kind of like peak that and then shift it down slightly so it's peaking before. So you're actually like kind of making the fundamental, you're making a new fundamental louder than the old fundamental. And then because you're raising the lower the half and double harmonically, you're also giving it the harmonic saturation to more solidify that new fundamental. You see what I'm saying? So like it kind of retunes without retuning. It's
basically just like saturation spectral resonator. If you've ever used that on Ableton. It's very, very cool. Very sick.
It's a very heady, weird thing to think about, but it is, in a mixing scenario, it can save a snare or like other things. It can save a production.
Yeah, this looks nice. I have something similar to this. So do you just grab a slider and move it up pretty much, or not a slider, like a
point?
Thing?
Yeah. It doesn't go down. It only goes up.
And that's like moving that up is like moving up the saturation.
Yes. And then there's also a mix knob on it too. So like whenever you get like really bad sources in and you want to fix something, like you can really reshape stuff with Spectre and it sounds pretty good.
Nice.
And but then you could also do more subtle stuff like what we were just talking
Yeah,
about.
or more aggressive stuff with like sound design stuff. You could get kind of blend the worlds.
The thing I love about saturation is that how much it like smooths stuff out. Like maybe more specifically, like soft clipping is like so nice with like drums and stuff. You can kind of just get rid of a tiny little peak and it sounds the same. But from the computer side of things, the compressors aren't like, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. Because it doesn't hit them with such like force.
I like to use saturation at a lot of like subtle saturation at the end of like my vocal chain a lot of the times, just because it's like an extra layer of compression basically. I'm super pumped. Like my mic, for some reason it works really well with like the UAD Neve Pre, and so if I start clipping on there, like the saturation will just like kind of naturally compress it, but it's not super harsh. Which is super cool. And so like I've just been trying to find new ways to like push, how hard can I actually saturate this before it sounds distorted,
Right. And it's crazy with really saturation. Cool. You can use it in ways that don't sound like gritty.
Yeah. Much more subtle.
It just makes stuff like nice and like even and sometimes crispy, whatever, like especially when you're working with like multi-band saturation and stuff, you really however you want it, especially since you can do like dry wet knob a lot of times.
It kind of evens it out.
Knob, whatever.
Was there another plugin that you were thinking about? So we got on the sidetracked about the saturation conversation.
Let's see. So I've been definitely on FabFilter Saturn 2. Recently, that's been a huge one. Not a lot of new ones that I've been playing with. I mean, I love OTT, but y'all already know about that.
What's a staple for you? What do you feel like is like a go-to?
I will say, with OTT, I think there's something I could add here that might have some value.
Okay.
I use OTT a lot. I use it differently than I think a lot of people use it. A lot of people don't realize you can use it very transparently by, there's only really mostly 3 knobs that I mess with. I don't mess with like the time, the in gain or out gain, but the depth and then the upward and downward down at the bottom. I turn the depth often like way down, like down. If it's a really subtle thing, it doesn't even end up being that subtle at like 5%. It like does a lot. So like it's smart to use it.
That's what I always say.
Low wetness.
I keep finding myself putting OTT on a vocal if it's not sitting right at 5%, and it typically does the trick.
Yeah, and the other thing I do to make it more subtle is down at the bottom, the upward and downward knobs. That's just how much you want it to be upward compression and how much downward compression you want to happen. I just turn both of those down a bit to like maybe 80%. What that does is it's only affecting your wet signal, right? So it's just doesn't have it be as harshly everything is slammed. Like even the really, really quiet stuff, it lets the really, really quiet stuff be a little more like quiet.
Dude, it's also really great on anything that you want to like plant in the background, but also not bury it. I was doing like this. It was like almost like an Adele kind of song, and there were these really big keys in it. But the problem was that they were so big that they were like out of place with the rest of everything else. But then if I put them in the back, then it's like, oh, now we're missing that feel. So I literally just put OTT, I think it was at like 7 or 8%, and it just killed it just enough that like it just sat in the background, but you could still hear it. And I was like, this is perfect. And so now ever since I did that, I've been like, maybe I should try OTT more often, because it's also kind of funny being like, oh, I'm a so-called professional using ATT.
So what I've noticed with OTT is like what it really does wonders for, to me, is the high end. It makes your high end more like flattened upward. Basically, it kind of just brings up their crystal clear highs.
The clarity.
Like a little more like driven almost.
Yeah. It's a great way to get.
You don't notice what it.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, whenever I use it, I feel like I'm like squeezing more detail out of things. So I definitely know what you mean.
Yeah, it's like bringing your sparkle up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like mastering your treble upwards a little bit on every track.
On everything.
But I feel like it does a lot more for that than for the mids and lows. Like it does stuff to those, but like it's always your treble that technically is lower in amplitude than your mids and lows. So it ends up bringing that up a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. It's controlling it all too. So you're not getting those giant peaks of like high end blowing you out every now and again too. It kind of like levels it all out because it's comping it down. So it's pinning it a little bit.
Yeah. So I do know there are some people the more like natural, I don't use auto-tune type of people or whatever who kind of slam OTT and they're like, oh, dude, these young kids just throw OTT on stuff and they're stupid. But I think they haven't tried like using OTT at a really like in a subtle way. You just put it, you can literally hear a difference on some things with 1% dry wet. Mm-hmm. Like it literally, I've done that before and it really helps. And you turn down the upward and downward down a bit to make the wet part a little less aggressive, and you can really do great stuff with it.
I want to thank all of our great guests for coming on this year, and I want to thank you listeners for listening. If you have a guest that you'd like to see on the podcast, go to this episode on YouTube and drop it in the comments. We'd love to get some feedback from you guys on who you want to hear us talk with. And wherever you're listening or watching, please subscribe and like and share it with a friend who you think might enjoy the show. We've had such a great year of growth with you and the community and with our guests and just me and Josh being able to do this more regularly. And we're super grateful for all of you for listening. We love you guys a lot. And yeah, we're super excited for the next year of the podcast.